Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Landing Spot podcast. Today's guest is Hollie Jeffery, and I'm so excited about this episode. It is going to be jam packed. Hollie, I want you to just take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about yourself, your educational background, why you chose the career that you chose, and just anything you want to throw in there about that part of your story, because I believe it's so relevant to everything else that we're going to cover today.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for asking me to be on your show today. I really appreciate it. And you and I have had tons of conversations about this. So it's exciting to be able to have these conversations in a way that other people can kind of hear how we talk about things and share information back and forth. So my name is Hollie Jeffery. I am the founder of ACE Institute. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I started ACE Institute about 2 years ago after I had spent the last 18 years working in child protection services and the child advocacy field. I grew up in a small town, Bruce, Mississippi, and am a sexual abuse survivor, and always knew that I wanted to go into a profession where I helped other people. I just didn't know what that profession was. I've never really had a plan. Right out of college, I was living in small town Bruce, Mississippi, and couldn't find a job. I was having to drive everywhere to apply, 30 to 45, sometimes 60 minutes away, looking for jobs. And after I couldn't find anything, I started praying, God, open the door that you want me to go into, open the profession that you want me to be in. Because with social work, it's kind of like nursing. There's so many different things that you can do. And so but there was one place that I knew that I didn't want to work, and that was child protection services. I was afraid of it. I heard stories about those cases in college. And so I started praying. And, the funny thing was, I think God has this really crazy sense of humor, because about a week or two after I started praying for a job, child protection services called me and offered me a job, but I had never sent an application to them. And so I had never, I knew I didn't want to work there, so I'd never applied there. But then they called me and offered me an interview and a job immediately after. And so, for me, it was divine intervention, but it had to happen that way because it's an extremely hard job to do because of all the things that you're exposed to and the stress and just the constant. I mean, you just don't get away from the stress of that job. You carry it home with you. You think about it at night when you're trying to go to sleep. And so had it not been that divine intervention, I probably would not have ever applied for child protection services. And if I had, I would have quit when it got hard and tough. But because it happened the way that it did, I felt like God called me into that. I stayed through the hard times. And it led me 18 years later to open my own training and consulting company. Again, something that I felt God led me to do, mainly because the children that experience long-term child abuse and neglect have really poor outcomes, not just emotionally and behaviorally and socially, but they have poor health outcomes too. As a result of all the stress that they go through when they're being abused. So God's heart for them is that they would thrive based on, if we're to look at scripture and based on Isaiah 61, where he says that he wants to trade us a crown of beauty for the ashes of our lives, and he wants to restore double what the enemy has stolen from us, and where he commands his people to help the oppressed and to help set the captives free and clothe the poor and feed the hungry, working with these survivors of child abuse that have experienced this child abuse their whole lives and seeing their outcomes where they're homeless and they're susceptible and vulnerable to being sexually trafficked and vulnerable to substance abuse and early death. Their outcomes are not good, but these are the ones that God is calling us to love. These are the ones where he is saying, my heart for them is for them to thrive and for them to be restored. And so my goal is for ACE Institute to be a place where we can educate the communities and the professionals on what is child abuse and neglect, how does it impact people, what are you going to see in a survivor long term, and how can we as a community step in and interlock arms with them and walk with them until they get to that thriving point. So
scenario, especially when we're talking about childhood trauma. And a lot of people do experience that, and you have the statistics on that. But trauma is also relative, and it can what may seem minor to some can impact us physiologically, our neural pathways, our trauma responses well into adulthood, and our decision making abilities or lack thereof, when it comes to food, healthy lifestyle, that sort of thing, but also just the physiological responses that we have to stress. And so I'm going to let you dive into that. So, but I think a great starting point would be to define trauma, and then talk a little bit about the different trauma scenarios that the test that you've referred to often will ask for, and just dive into that to start out.
Okay. As far as a definition for trauma, I don't have like the full Webster's dictionary definition, but like you said, it's very relative. And kind of the way that I would describe it is it's any kind of experience that a person might have that takes them outside of what it is they are prepared to handle. Okay. And so it's very subjective to that particular person. A goldfish dying for a child can be very traumatic. We've got children who have been sexually abused. We've got children who've been sexually abused once by somebody that they didn't know. We've got children that are being raped every night by their dad. And so it's when we look at trauma, there's lots of different things that we look at when it comes to if a person has experienced trauma. We're looking at, did they experience the trauma? Number two, where did they and who did they experience the trauma from or with? How intense was the trauma? Sometimes you can have one really big T trauma. Let's say maybe the death of your parent when you were a child. That's a really big T trauma. And it can be very, very, very impactful. It can be a little T trauma. I don't want to minimize divorce, but a divorce might be one of those situations that, it was an amicable divorce. There was no fighting. There was no grumbling. There's no yik-yakking back and forth. It seems to be an okay relationship. They're sharing custody of the kids, but it's still a traumatic thing for a child when their parents are not together. And in fact, separated parents is part of the adverse childhood experiences study. So you've got intensity. Intensity is the big T trauma. Then you've got frequency. How often is it happening? Is this happening one time? Did it happen every day? Duration, how long did it go on? And that can take on two different things. Duration can mean it started yesterday afternoon and it went on for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, or it started when I was 4 and went on till I was 29.
Right.
So we're looking at duration, we're looking at intensity, we're looking at frequency. With the adverse childhood experiences study, which is what my company is named after, we didn't do the study. But the study was done by a group of physicians back in the late 1990s that were treating chronically ill medical patients. These were physicians who were treating people with heart disease, lung disease, obesity. Many of them were bariatric patients who had gone through different types of bariatric surgeries. And what they noticed is that they started, their chronic illnesses were not getting better. They would gain the weight back after the surgeries. And so the physicians were researchers too, and they wanted to understand why. And they started asking a few questions, and they noticed that most of the patients had similar stories of early childhood trauma. So they developed a 10-question questionnaire. And you got 1 point for every question you answered yes to. And it was 10 traumas. And some of them are abuse and neglect, and some of them are household dysfunction. So abuse and neglect would be emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Then you have emotional neglect, physical neglect. And then the household dysfunctions are going to be mental illness in the family, incarceration of a parent, divorce or separation in a parent. And I never can remember domestic violence in the household. And I can't remember that other one, but there's one that I always forget. But the thing about these particular traumas is that they're in the home, which means that they're chronic, which means that they're frequent, which means that it's happening a lot. There's a lot of exposure to these traumas long term. They usually start when the child is early, and they're ongoing throughout that child's life. So this is not one big T trauma that happened one time in that child's life. It can be hundreds of big T traumas that happen over a life, the child's childhood, or it can be a lot of small T traumas that happen over a long period of time. But in this study, they found that 75% of Americans have at least one of these traumas in their lifetime, in their childhood. And they found that 20% of Americans have at least 3 or more.
Wow. That is insane. So that is pretty astounding statistics. And I think that it's important for people to hear those statistics, specifically when we are looking at adult health and how these stats impact health. So can you talk a little bit more about that? So you said 70 or 75% of people who had at least one, and what that means as far as chronic disease development in adult years.
So what they have found is that the higher the number you get to 10, the more likely you are to die at least 20 years earlier.
Wow.
The closer you get to 10, the more likely you are to die 20 years earlier.
And so when you say the closer that you get to 10, so you're saying your score. So how many you've checked yes to from those traumatic experiences. Okay.
Yes. So like for instance, they found that the higher your score, the more your propensity is to be a substance abuser. They found that if you go from a score of 3 to a score of 4, just adding one more adverse childhood experience in your life increases your chances of becoming an intravenous substance abuser by 1,400%.
And that is not something to take lightly, because the IV drug epidemic that has hit our country right under our noses, right here in small town Mississippi, all the way across the U.S. This is not something that's only happening in big inner cities. This is everywhere now.
People are ODing on these intravenous drugs every day at increasingly alarming rates.
Yeah.
And if we were to go back and look in their childhoods, it's very likely that they have some childhood trauma there. And what happens is they start using earlier in life in order to cope with what's happened to them. They're at increased risk for riskier behaviors. They're at increased risk for riskier sexual behaviors. They're at increased risk for smoking. Adverse childhood experiences, the higher your number, the more likely you are to die of heart disease, lung disease, and 3 types of cancers. The top 3 causes of death in the United States are directly related to your exposure of early childhood trauma.
So this is the reason that I wanted to talk about this, because when I first started looking at getting my life together, I took this mindset of suck it up. You don't have anybody to blame for your past. You just need to eyes down and get to work. And it eventually caught up with me, not just mentally, but physically, and when I was in a healthier mind space, then I was able to look at the things that happened when I was younger. Nothing horrific like some of the stories that I've heard from you, but I had things that affected my coping skills and my relationship with food. And if I did not take a look at these things, acknowledge them, and understand myself better, there's so many behaviors that I would not have been able to change.
Right.
And so this is important for everyone, I think, to look into, because I have worked with many women and it took them a long time before they were able to get past a lot of the psychological aspects of changing their life when it comes to food and movement. And it had nothing to do with them being a lover of Snickers. I mean, don't get me started on how addictive our food is. It had everything to do with their lack of healthy coping mechanisms and not even recognizing that these pathways have been created to catapult their day into a binge because XYZ happened. This was something that developed in early childhood, and there's no acknowledgement of that, then it's really hard to change that behavior.
There is a lot of blaming and shaming that goes on. And that's why I ended up getting into this, is because early in my career as a bachelor's level social worker, working with all of the children that I worked with, I was one of those workers that blamed and shamed, because I was like, we're sending you to therapy, we're giving you medication. I don't understand why you're not better. I don't understand why this is a perfectly good foster home, or I've handed the parents, I've handed you the resource directory. Why are you not accessing the resources that I've sent you to? It was only when I became trauma informed, and by trauma informed, I mean when I really understood the neurobiology of what trauma does to the body, and to the brain's development, is when I really began to look back and think, wow, it's not that they didn't want to get better. It's that their brain was really not allowing them to get better. You talked a little bit about pathways earlier. When you have been exposed long term and chronically to all of these traumas, your body responds to that. We are physiologically designed to run and fight and survive when we are threatened. And the only way that I know how to best explain this to people, is it okay for me to share the bear story now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Bear story. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody on the podcast has ever watched the show Alone. So there's this show on the History Channel called Alone, and it's these fools who have signed up voluntarily to be dropped off in the wilderness, and they get like 7 things they can take with them, right? Like a backpack full of stuff. They've got maybe some wire or rope or twine or fishing line or something like that. They get to their choice of a knife or an axe of some kind, so that they can like chop down trees and cut stuff. But I think they can usually only choose like 1 or 2 of those. There's no gun, there's no bear spray. And then they get like a tarp that they can make a tent out of, but there's no shelter out there. If they get a shelter, it's because they chop the tree down and build it themselves, or they can use the string to tie up the tent, and some people tie the tarp between trees, and so it's flat, and some people do it like a traditional tent. And there's a reason why I'm telling the tent story. So these people get dropped off. Some of them know how to make a fire by rubbing their hands together in a stick, and some of them have a flint. But you, based on your skill, is kind of how you choose what it is you're taking with you. So they're dropped off in the middle of nowhere with predators everywhere. There's bears, there's wolves, there's mountain lions. There's rushing water. There's bugs. There's all these things. And so the last man standing gets $500,000. And so you have to wait everybody out, but you don't know who's left. You don't know how many's left. And so you've got these people who voluntarily sign up to go into this. And it's always funny because, they'll follow them for a few days and follow them at home before they come on the show. And they're always bragging about what they would do if they saw a predator or a bear or whatever. And, so they talk a big talk. And so you're always kind of anticipating when they run into the bear, because you want to see if they really are going to follow through with what they're going to say. So there was this one guy that I got super tickled at because he was just talking about how macho he was. And he's walking through the woods at night, and he has his camera set up everywhere, and they have walkie talkies now. They can tap out at any time. And there were, some of them tap out because they lost their flint. Now they can't make fire. Some of them tap out because they ate the wrong berries and now they feel like they've poisoned themselves. And so, they tap out and they'll come in by sea or by air to extract them from this location. So this guy, it's raining, it's nighttime, and he's walking through the woods with his flashlight, and he runs up on a bear. And he runs from the bear, and the bear pursues him. And guess where he runs to? His tent. He runs to his tent. And he happened to make like a traditional tent, and he's got the ends are covered, and it covers over him. Had he had it this way, where it's just strung up between trees and it's flat, he probably wouldn't have survived. He did survive. He ran into the tent. The bear gave pursuit, but for some reason, it was probably because he was sitting there crying, please, baby Jesus, save me, save me. Like he is crying.
Scared for his life.
Like the bear's outside. And you can see the bear circling the tent, but the bear does not come into the tent. And it hit me because I was like, these kids that have been exposed to these traumas are kind of like this show. This guy is able to tap out. He calls somebody, but they were 5 hours away. They couldn't come in by sea. They couldn't come in by air. They had to come in hiking to extract him. So he had to wait 5 hours for him to be rescued. And they were trying to get up with him during this time, but they are in the middle of the bush and they can't get a hold of him. Either the signal's bad or he's not answering. And they're saying, I hope he is still alive. Mm. And I tell this because I want you to feel the terror of this man. He knew the bear was outside, and he knew that he could not stop the bear from coming inside. It was only by God's grace that he was alive. But I want you to...
And that there was no help.
There was no help coming.
It was hours away.
They were coming, but they were hours away.
Yeah.
So think about these kids. These kids live in a forest of bears in tents, and nobody's coming to get them. They don't have a way to tap out.
Yeah.
So when we think about this guy who's sitting there in his tent and he's freaking out and he's panicking and he has a tap out button, but we can still feel him panicking. Like, can you imagine how his heart is beating, how his breathing is, and all these chemicals that are being pumped into his body that's preparing him to potentially have to either run some more or fight this bear.
Fight for his life.
To fight for his life. These kids live in that every day, all day, without the ability to tap out. And so that same panic is there for them all day, every day. Those chemicals are constantly being pumped into their bodies. And what it's doing, it's creating havoc on the inside. And you can talk probably a little bit better about that havoc that it's causing, the hormonal imbalances, the problem with too much cortisol and things like that. And it's causing all of these health disparities later on in life because they have lived in the forest of bears their entire childhood, and their bodies have had to adapt to living with the bears.
Yeah. They're in constant fight or flight.
Constant fight or flight.
And this is something that I talk with clients about quite often, because as adults, if we do
I'm
not,
going to interrupt you there and say, fight or flight is a physiological response.
yes,
This
yes.
is
And
not something that you can just turn off. Your body, it's an automatic response. And I interrupted you for this. When we blame and shame, we are essentially saying that these people should be able to override their body's natural physiological response to threats. We are blaming and shaming them for something they have no control over. They don't have control over the bears, number one. And then they also don't really have control over what their body's response is to the bear. Just like if you were to touch a hot stove, you're not going to sit there and think, gee, what should I do? Should I remove my hand from this stove? It's hot and it's burning and I'm probably going to be injured, so I probably should move it. No, it's an automatic physiological response because your survival response mechanism is close in your brain to that part of your brain that controls your breathing and your heartbeat and your blinking. You can't stop yourself from breathing. You can't stop yourself from blinking. You can't stop yourself. Those are those automatic responses. And that's where that fight, flight, or freeze is. And so we're telling these people that they should be able to override their body's natural response system, and they can't. And that was what was so crucial to me, is I'm blaming and shaming people for how their brain has wired them to protect them and stay alive in what they've been exposed to.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, you're dead on. This is so spot on to so many things in women's health. Okay. So it's spot on in health regardless. But it's that autonomic nervous system, right? It's the part of the nervous system that we don't control. And so we have these physiological responses to stressors in our life. And this is something that we as adults face quite often. It was interesting when you were talking about the real deal predators that were surrounding these people on this TV show, lions, tigers, bears. And that is the example that I use when I'm educating clients and women on why mitigating stress is so important, because our bodies are still running as if we are living in those primitive times. So these quote unquote bears that these children experience, because their body is all of the time now registering any sort of stress, big or small, as a bear. Their cortisol levels are constantly high, which spikes inflammation. Cortisol and insulin do this dance. So they're highly likely going to be diabetic because they're going to be resistant to insulin at an early age. You personally have experience with that. So, and the blaming and shaming, if there was ever anything that would register with our female listeners who have been misunderstood by their physicians, I think that really resonates with a lot of us, that, our doctor's answers are, here's another medicine. Why aren't you, eating less and moving more? Why aren't you just need to lose weight? Well, they haven't been taught how to override these physiological responses. And so their body,
I'm tired.
yes,
Man,
yes.
cortisol wears you out.
And
just want to sleep.
Yes. And I'll definitely touch on that. But yeah, so we have no control over these things, and our physicians are looking at us like we do, as if we do, or, as if the medication is going to fix it. So it's so important that we understand that a lot of the physiological responses we have as adults to stress, to an email, a text message, a, disgruntled spouse, whatever, that probably is in your body registering a lot more intensely because of some of these neural pathways that were created when you were a child. And your body is always, always, always going to put your survival first. And so when your body thinks that that email, that you don't want to open is a lion, tiger, or bear, you're going to elicit this huge cortisol response, which is going to spike your insulin, which is going to make everything that you eat within a couple of hours of that incident pretty much be stored as fat, unless you do some lifestyle interventions to hack that. But so you have women that are eating nothing, 800,000 calorie diets, and they're gaining weight, and then that adds on to more stress. And so while we can't change the things that have happened to us in the past, we have to acknowledge them so that we can start to slowly and lovingly teach our bodies that we are okay, that this is not, in fact, a lion, tiger, or bear. So we can start to mitigate that stress and start to get results. And that brings me to what you and I had a discussion about the other day that was so impactful to me. And that is the stress of your job and the stress that it caused in your life, that on your health, the impact that it had on your health. But not only that, a lot of your coworkers, you've seen it affect them, and how important it is for people in your field specifically, but I would say in life in general these days, to incorporate some self-care. And that doesn't really mean, a manicure and a new purse, it means breathing. It means, some of the things that you have taught people in your field to do. So talk a little bit about some of the stresses in your job and how your health started to decline as a result.
So I'll interject here for just 2 seconds and say I had to self-diagnose myself with PCOS. I was going to a dermatologist and to a nurse practitioner for OBGYN services, and both of them missed it. I was getting treated for the different symptoms and neither one of them caught on to it. So WebMD, there you go. I self-diagnosed. And it was years later before I got the confirmation on that diagnosis by another NP. But in that meantime, I started working for Child Protection Services. So I already have the issue with PCOS and the insulin resistance. And then you start adding the stress of the cortisol with, I'm doing child death investigations. I'm doing child abuse investigations. We were always understaffed. So there's always this sense of urgency. I had to make decisions about whether or not a child stayed with their parent or had to be removed from their parent. And then you have to go remove those children from their parents. That's all stressful. The hours were nonstop. I mean, you're really on call to your clients 24/7. You just didn't get away from it. And when I was around 26 or 27 years old, that was going on in my career. My personal life was going down the tank as far as like my marriage. And so there was a lot of stress going on. And early on, as a late teenager, I was put on birth control. And I'd gotten off of birth control when I was married with the hopes of getting pregnant. Well, that didn't ever happen because PCOS, it's hard to get pregnant. And then, so as I was getting out of that marriage, and I was having a lot of these symptoms I had a lot of facial hair, I had a lot of acne on my neck. They put me back on birth control. The first birth control that I got put on was the ring that you insert. Well, that thing made me crazy. And my coworkers were like, we don't know what you've done different in the last couple of weeks, but you are insane and you need to get off of whatever it is you've gotten on. And so I knew immediately it was the birth control. So they switched me to Yaz birth control. And within 4 months of taking Yaz birth control, I had a stroke.
Okay. Y'all heard that. Okay. This is a 26-year-old woman who, thank God, has lived to tell that she had a stroke. And
I don't have residual effects from it.
Yes.
But I could have.
Yes.
What I was told later, I have a friend the CrossFit gym that I go to here has a lot of medical students and a lot of physicians that attend. And so I was telling my story one day to one of the cardiology residents there, and he got so excited. And basically, he told me what happened. After a series of tests, they found that I had a hole in my heart. And what this guy told me, and we went in and we closed up the hole after the stroke. But what he basically told me was that the birth control likely caused the blood clot somewhere, maybe in my leg. It traveled up into my heart, and instead of going into the lungs where it would have killed me, it somehow got sucked into that little hole and sent into the other chamber of my heart, where it went to the brain instead of the lung. And so had the hole not been there, I would probably have died.
And I have never heard that part. So I'm a little bit blown away, and
Yeah.
it solidifies that the Lord is not done with you yet. You
Right.
have such a
Right.
huge job, but wow.
I lived by myself. It
Mm.
was late at night. It was a headache on the left side of my brain, way down deep. It was the worst headache that I'd ever had. I turn over, I look at the alarm clock, and I can't see half the numbers on the alarm clock. I'd had a stressful day that day at work. I'd traveled to Jackson and back. I lived in Oxford at the time. And I was like, it's a migraine. And so I slept that night thinking it was a migraine, but I didn't sleep. The pain never did go away. It results later. I drove myself the next day to see my family physician. I didn't, because I knew if I went to an emergency room with a headache, that I'd sit there for hours. But when I got to my family physician, he sent me for a CAT scan, and it was a stroke. And so my vision on the right side was gone for about 4 weeks, but eventually it came back. But just very, very blessed. Some people are completely paralyzed down one side. I have no effects from that stroke whatsoever now, 14 years later, 15 years later.
Yeah.
But very, very blessed. And but I've had friends who have worked this job, and they've had, I can't tell you how many friends I've had that have had miscarriages. Several of them have died of heart attacks in their 30s.
So yeah. So let's back up. So we have birth control, which was being used to quote unquote, treat the hormone imbalance.
Mhm.
And then we have the stress. So the insane amount of stress that was going unmitigated. And that's just as big. We're not going on a birth control rampage, although I'm definitely tempted to at times, but we want to highlight the stress. And so when you talk about, coworkers and friends in your field, and they have these major health events, let's dive into that. So tell me a little bit more. So heart attacks,
Heart attacks, miscarriages. There's tons of miscarriages in women in this field, as far as like just working with these types of, just this is a hard field to be in.
Yes. And I want to talk about, okay, I need to preface this with my knowledge is very small on this topic. Okay. But I do want to cover why a miscarriage when, as a result of a stressful job. If we think about the job of our ovaries, that they are kind of like eyes in our body, in the sense that they are always looking around inside our bodies to make sure that everything is okay. Because if everything is not okay, it is not a good time to have a baby. And so it will shut down its main function in preparing for a baby, or carrying a baby to full term, because this is not a safe environment. And so if you are under chronic stress, and, whether you have PCOS or, other issues, if you are under chronic stress and not addressing that can very well set you up to struggle with fertility. So anyway, I just wanted to explain a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to talk about my own fertility struggles, I was married for 6 years, and never could get pregnant. And as I got older, I knew that I wanted to have children. And everything that I was learning about PCOS, I had to learn really on my own.
Mm.
When I moved to Jackson, I needed to find a new OBGYN to go to. And I wanted to find one that knew about PCOS and could really help me figure out, I work in this stressful environment. I'm getting older. I want to have children. I know that I have some control. Like, I can't control the types of cases and the work that I do unless I just leave this industry altogether. So how can I change my lifestyle to get healthier so that I can have children? So me getting healthier was strictly because I wanted to have children at some point, and everything that I had read told me that I could control this through diet and exercise and things like that. But I didn't know which one to choose. I didn't know, there's so many options out there. I needed that support. So I go see this OBGYN, and she basically charged me $140 for a 30-minute consultation, where she said, you know more about PCOS than I do. But because you want to have babies, I'm going to send you to an endocrinologist who can probably answer some of your questions and knows maybe more about this, because it's a metabolic issue, is what she said. And so I'm going to send you to him, and maybe he can answer your questions. So I paid $300 to go see him, because these were not covered medical expenses. These were consultations. And so he basically said, it doesn't matter if you have PCOS, diet doesn't matter. I mean, I guess you could change your diet if you wanted to, but the easiest thing for you to do is just take metformin. Here's you 2,000 milligrams of metformin a day. This should help you, be able to get everything under control, so that, when you want to have kids, you're able to. And, we can help you freeze some eggs if, you don't get into a relationship soon. Allison, have you ever tried to take 2,000 milligrams of metformin?
So fortunately, that was not ever offered to me, but I had written off those forms of intervention before it got to that. But I speak with women all over the US, right? And that's the first go-to. And again, metformin was not tested on women in the initial clinical trials because our hormonal systems vary too much to make us good statistically sound data participants. And so anyway, back to the women that from what I know, based on the personal data I've collected, is that it wreaks havoc on your stomach. It's
Oh my God. I was down for a week for just taking I attempted the 2,000 milligrams the first couple of days, and whoa, no. So I went back to, I'll start with one, which is 500 milligrams a day, and build myself up. 500 milligrams kept me out for probably 3 days of work. And then I eventually built myself up to 1,000 milligrams, but I was miserable. I was nauseous all the time and could not get very far from a bathroom. I'll just say that. And it took weeks and weeks and weeks to get used to it. But I mean, you still had some side effects from it. And it just got to where I don't know, maybe I met you around that time or something, and we had conversations about it. I don't know, but I ended up getting off of it that time. I got back on it a couple of years later for maybe about a year. And, it helped regulate my periods and stuff for a little while. But over time, going to CrossFit and then getting my nutrition under control is really what has had the best impact for me, and best effects for me, so that I don't have to take, that kind of medication. But it was just very discouraging. And when I asked the physician about diet, he had no recommendations of a diet at all. And I was pre-diabetic at that point. Like, I was really on the verge of being diabetic. My blood sugar was way out of control. And I have type 2 diabetes in my family. I'd watched my grandmother die from it. So I knew that that's not the direction that I wanted to go. And unfortunately, you and I have talked about this a couple of times. My dad committed suicide from taking medication for acid reflux. So I just didn't trust the medical field at that point. I just trusted them to give you medication to mask symptoms
Mm-hmm.
and not get to the bottom of issues. They really could have just um, given him a, a nutrition plan and monitored his nutrition to take care of some of the issues with the medications. Instead of giving him, why would you give a lethal medication for a non-lethal ailment? And so I just didn't, I'd lost trust and faith, and I knew that I was going to have to search for myself and take my health into my own hands. Those are things that I could control. I love the work that I do. And so I knew being in this work was going to continue to be stressful. So that meant that I had to be intentional
Mm.
about my own health care and my own self care. And I had to change some things in my life in order to make self care a priority. Otherwise, I was going to get type 2 diabetes. I would never be able to have children. And I would continue to see my health decline.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so spot on. One of the things that I tell my clients all the time is I wish I could take the stress away from you more than I wish I could take it off your plate, but I can't. However, we are going to focus on XYZ so that your body is not feeling it as intensely. So I watched you transform when you started CrossFit, and I don't want to give too much glory to CrossFit. I love it. It's so much fun for me. We as women, nearing that perimenopausal age, have to watch how many times a week we are doing high intense exercise, because that can also have an impact, a negative impact on our hormonal status. However, it was more about the lifestyle that you developed as a result, because your social surroundings changed. Now, everybody around you, number one, that your location particularly had a ton of med students, young med students, and then just everybody in these gyms, these atmospheres, they're going next level. It's one thing I love about my gym. The previous owner of my gym, he is the one who introduced me to Dr. Jason Fung and all of his data on fasting. And this is what started my entire career. And it's, you are your life is a result of the top 5 people that you hang around. And so with your surroundings changing, everything about your life started to change. And it was really nice to see. And something that you mentioned the other day was, now you've been pursuing health, and it started with getting the courage to walk into that gym. And then from there, it's been nutrition changes, and it's been some trial and error with that. It didn't all happen at once. It's been over what, 5, 6, 7 years now?
About 5 or 6 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there have been these multiple, it's kind of been a step ladder of changes and trial and error. But your health looks completely different than it did when you first walked in those doors. And
I wish we could show before and after photos, because the before and after photos are just, it's funny because I have shown people my before picture, and they're like, who is that? They don't even know that it's me.
The physical changes are huge, but your internal changes are just as significant. Yeah, I mean, it is a completely different person. And so having been where you've been now, or working towards your health for this long, and recently went to a conference where you saw some colleagues that you've known for years. And, our intention is not to belittle or call anybody out, but it was so profound to me that you noticed the stress of the job on the outside of them. Talk a little bit about that and how profound that was to you.
I was, I was so sad. I was so sad. Um, I, It's so hard to describe because I used to look like that. I used to be them. You know, they're still working in that frontline part of this job. I'm doing more of training and consulting, and I don't have that hands-on contact with clients like they are. So they're still kind of in the middle of it. But there's also choices that they're making probably that is causing them to look this way. They look like walking death.
Mm.
Is the best way that I could describe it. They're very swollen,
Mm-hmm.
very puffy, like their eyes are very puffy. Their faces are very puffy. Um, and they just look very, very, very tired.
Yeah.
And is the best way that I can describe them. And you know, self-care, you can tell, is on the back burner for them. Many of them, you know, not only do they have stressful jobs, but they all have families. And, you know, I can't tell you again the amount of people who get divorced in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it impacts your relationships. We bring our own childhood trauma into our job and into our relationships, and we have dysfunctional relationships. And so it's, you know, self-care is also about being self-aware
Mm-hmm.
and realizing when you're toxic, and, you know, how to become emotionally healthy, how to become spiritually healthy and relationally healthy, and really taking that internal look at yourself, which is what I had to do and what I'm still having to do, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and making choices, taking those things that you can control and making changes towards them. You know, I decided to walk into that CrossFit gym that day scared to death. I had tried gyms before where you walk in, you get on a treadmill and you see everybody else and nobody's talking to anybody. You don't know what to do. You don't know what's going on. That's how you and I met, because I paid you to show me what to do. Well, I'm not very wealthy as a social worker, so I couldn't hire you to do that for a long period of time. But I had results when you and I were training together. So I knew that if I went consistently, I could get those results. So someone told me about CrossFit. I go in there. Allison, on the first day, she had me do 30 squats, and I ran to the bathroom to throw up.
Yeah.
30
And then
squats.
you went back.
And she told me, she said, Holly, I never anticipated you to come back. And so, but I came back, and I came back because my coach was supportive and helpful. And the other people in that gym cheered me on. So I stuck with it for a month, and I saw some results. I had some little muscles pop up here.
Mm-hmm.
And in the CrossFit community, they encouraged me when I was tired. They cheered me on when I wanted to give up. I will stop and give up every time. My brain tells me you don't like this and it
Mm-hmm.
sucks. It's okay to stop. And about the time I have convinced myself to quit, somebody over here encourages me to keep going. And so I needed that encouragement. And then
Accountability. Yeah.
the accountability. And then I kept seeing these positive gains.
Mm-hmm.
I could see, you know, the inches coming off. I felt better. I had more energy. I was not tired all the time. The foggy brain started going away.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing. I've had foggy brain my entire career. I didn't know how to function without it, but it started going away. I started having regular periods.
Yeah. So
Which
these,
is
yeah,
crazy.
it's shocking. And these self-care, when we say self-care, um, I want to define that a little bit more, because when you're talking about your colleagues, and I see it too, we both, for our listeners, Holly and I both are in Mississippi, and so we are the bottom of the barrel when it comes to health stats as a state. And we see a lot of this chronic disease on the outside of people now. When I go into a store, I don't see skinny fat. I see healthy and diseased. Okay. And so dis-ease means your body is not at ease. Okay. And you can, I mean, when you look into someone's face, the puffiness that you described, the exhaustion, it's all right there. And um, it breaks my heart too. And so when we talk about self-care for someone in that state of disease, it's not going to get a manicure. That's could be the furthest thing that would be beneficial to their life, maybe some downtime, but we're talking about prioritizing nutrition. And that's hard because there's a million different diets out there, right? And then, our fitness industry is geared towards a man's biology. A man can move more and eat less. He's on a 24-hour hormonal cycle. Women are on a 28 to 32 day hormonal cycle. Our biology it's completely different. So our dietary needs are different. So it's prioritizing whole foods. Start there, right? Whole foods, because these processed foods are filled with chemicals, and it may not kill you. It may be considered edible because it won't kill you immediately upon consumption, but have no doubt it is killing you. It is disrupting your cells' abilities to work properly, and they are mutating into diseased cells. And so it's prioritizing that. And that's not easy when you are in a busy job, when you have a family. It's not easy, but
it takes a lot of meal prep, and it takes a lot of, you have to meal plan and prep.
You do.
It is, and that's a struggle. I've had a coach for a year now, and when I meal plan and then take the step to prep so that I have the food with me, I see so much better results. But if I don't plan and I don't prep and I fly by the seat of my pants,
you can't wing it.
This is not something you can wing.
No.
because you can't pull into a fast food restaurant and get healthy food. Right. You're going to get, even if Chick-fil-A is the Lord's chicken and it is blessed, honey, but
it's the highest sodium of all the fast food restaurants, and it's not the good salt.
That's why it's so good. And they put butter all over their buns. Oh,
but that's crucial. And so, when I have a prospective client come to me and we're talking about whether we are going to be a good fit, and they say, well, I want XYZ for my health and weight loss, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, I don't have a lot of time. I'm not going to dedicate time to, cooking my own meals. Well, then I am going to tell you that you're not going to get healthy. It doesn't have to be hard. You can create systems that make it doable.
Easy.
Yeah. Oh, I'm lazy as all get out in the kitchen. There's no surprise why I'm single. I don't, my meals take me 20 minutes or less, and they're quick. They're easy. I think they're delicious. The more that we eat good, healthy foods, the more we're promoting healthy bacteria in our gut that speaks to our brain that says, hey, eat more of this, right? And we're flushing out that bad bacteria that's driving the cravings to eat the bad things. So I did want to touch on this. Listeners, forgive me, I'm jumping around a little bit, but the driving of cravings, and we earlier were really honing in on stress because Hollie's occupation is so stressful, and many of us are just under a significant amount of stress. We have not stepped out of that since 2020. So if we look at, someone who we have no idea what their story is, what their stressors are like at home or in work. And we say, why are you not eating healthy foods? And that blame and shame game. And I have so been there as a coach in the past. It was so frustrating to me. Or why are you still drinking? Or why are you still smoking? Or why are you using drugs? When we are under stress, as I mentioned earlier, our bodies will always fight to survive. So our body is registering this event, whatever it is, the stressful event, as we need energy to fight, flee. We're going to need energy very soon. And so it's this physiological driver is sending those signals to our brain to eat the potato chips or the ice cream, because your body breaks that down and turns it into usable energy instantly. There's no buffer zone. And so your body thinks this is a great idea because you need this energy to run or to fight for your life. And we're not
If
actually.
you're like me, you eat the potato chips and the ice cream because you want the sugar and the salt.
Yes, yes. And so you've got all this energy right here, ready to be used, but we're really just sitting at our desk getting through another day, processing or not processing thoughts and so it's not a matter of people at this point just choosing it because, oh, it sounds good. Some Lay's potato chips sounds really good right now. Their physiology is literally telling them, driving them insane to go get that. And so that's why eating well is so important, but we've got to do the work on stress management, learning some breath work techniques, making sure we're prioritizing sleep. So
don't buy the stuff and put it in your house.
Yes. Keeping it out of your house is key because although I've had so many people say, yeah, but I will still drive right down to the Sitco and go get me, but yes, I don't keep anything in my house that I consider a food a red food that's a danger zone food that I will, potentially binge on in a moment of stress.
Yeah.
But, we have a lot of women who have children and they have, snacks for school, even if they're the organic goldfish, it's something that we will want to go towards when we are stressed. Even if we don't recognize we're stressed, a lot of times our physiology is driving us to eat these things. So it's so important that we are not just looking at this from a food perspective, but we need to make sure that we're moving our body, like you mentioned, because you'll see all sorts of benefits from that very, very quickly. And we need to make sure that we are prioritizing sleep. If you are not getting proper sleep, your body is in fight or flight because, oh, why isn't this body sleeping? There must be something very dangerous on the horizon to prevent sleep at night. Our bodies were designed to sleep at night, right? So I'm going off on many tangents here, but it's multifaceted, but starting at that one place, like you did,
it's setting boundaries and priorities.
Yes.
So
Yes.
one thing that I never did, and I was lucky that I didn't have kids because I would continue to work at the office to 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And then I would go home, and my home was my safe space. I didn't carry child abuse cases to my house and work on casework from home, but I had lots of colleagues who took their laptops home because they had kids, so they had to be at home, right at 5 o'clock and after they got everybody to bed, they would continue to work from home. Mm-hmm. Well, where is your safe space?
Yeah.
And so you've got to have a safe space because when you're in your safe space, you can say, okay, brain, we are in our safe space. The bears can't come into the safe space. And we're not going to think about work. We're not going to focus on work. This is the time to enjoy my family. But when you bring it home with you,
it's like having the candy in the house. Yeah. It's there. Yeah. It's
so
present.
You have to create that boundary.
Yeah.
And you have to be intentional about getting out and getting into the sunlight and having, if you don't have to work out, but go walking, do something, get some fresh air, have some boundaries, and be sure that you're doing things with friends who are not in your profession. I burned out so quickly because all of my friends were either police officers or child protection services workers. Well, guess what we were talking about when we were together?
Yep.
Casey.
Yeah.
And so I was angry and bitter and burned out and I was not a happy person. So in my worst health, I was also burnt out. And so I realized that I had to have friends outside of my job that do not do my job. I call them bubble people because they don't live in that darkness that I live in the job that I do. I've seen things that I can't unsee. I know things that I can't unknow. But for a short period of time, I can go to the gym and hang out with people who have a goal-oriented mindset to prioritize their health. I can go out with my friends who work in a completely different field and talk about things that don't matter. That gets my mind off of work when I'm not at work.
Yeah.
But if I only hang around people who only do this, we're only going to think about this and talk about this, and it's going to be all. And I have seen the people who do that, and those are the ones who are the walking dead.
Mm-hmm.
They are tired and worn out and burn out, and they have not been intentional in bringing the light emotionally, spiritually, and physically into their life. They're staying in the darkness.
Yeah. And so that's such a brilliant point. And I want to give listeners some easy first steps, some tangible things that they can do. Because when you hear, creating health, spiritually, emotionally, it sounds really overwhelming, but just like you did, starting at that one place. So when we talk about boundaries, it's something as simple as, to me, this is what I thought about when you're talking about that. So for the longest time, I only bought books that had to do with health and nutrition and women's hormones. And I wanted to be a reader again and read before bed. And
that's like taking work to bed.
Exactly.
Now your bedroom is not a safe space anymore.
And so
you're bringing work into your safe space.
Yes. And that lesson was learned recently. Some of my friends from my gym have turned me on to some fun books. There's some movies coming out that they've read the books and they're phenomenal. So we're all sharing books, which is so cool, because who would have thought we'd start a book club with the gym girls? But that's what you're saying, have those friends that other topics can come up, and it can be important topics or relative topics to healthy lifestyle, but it's not all about work. And so
and when you're a business owner, you're always thinking about work.
Unless you're setting those intentional boundaries.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's something that I was able to do very early on, because school, when I went back to school at 30, and then grad school was so overwhelming and I couldn't breathe. And I was living in that state that you were when you were overwhelmed with work. And I decided, once I learned the impact of all of this on the body, that that's not how I want to live, So luckily I became very good at setting boundaries. Some of that's due to my recovery too. So it's been nice. But so the books, it was this aha moment for me. I can enjoy reading. I don't have to enjoy reading about hormones. I do, but not all the time. My brain doesn't want to be learning all the time. Yeah. But these books, I'm reading The Nightingale right now, and oh my goodness, it's just amazing. And I'm enjoying it again. And it's just like you said, that's the book that's on my bedside table. And
you're more likely to pick it up. You're not going to procrastinate picking that one up.
Exactly. And then, so we've got setting some boundaries. So don't bring your work past a certain time. Set a curfew, a work curfew. You and I talked about, so many people are working from home now. Designate a space in your home that is your workspace. Do not make your entire house your workspace. Certainly not your bedroom. So that's super helpful. You and I both learned that kind of our trial and error, right? Yeah. Sunlight, you spoke to my heart, because I'm always talking about sunlight, and it is so important. Get sunlight in the morning. Get your eyes exposed to sunlight in the morning. Don't wear your sunglasses. Go for a little walk around the parking lot at work if it's safe. This sets all these cellular clocks to tell your body when to release adrenaline and cortisol, so that you can be awake and have energy throughout the day. And it also sets that clock that's going to release melatonin in the evening at the proper time. So your sleep is going to improve. Blue lights, set a curfew for your technology. It is almost impossible not to feel stressed out when you're on social media, because some new event has happened that everybody's got, an opinion on, and many of those opinions may differ from yours, and that's frustrating and stressful. So these are some easy things. And then just figure out, start by shooting to add 2 servings of vegetables, whole foods to each meal. and some protein. If you don't know where to start with your health, this is what I help women do. If you're interested, I'd be glad to talk one-on-one. And I've got resources that I'll put in the show notes. But if, right now you just need the bare minimum, incorporate protein and a couple of servings of vegetables into each meal. And, once you start feeling a little bit better, just like you did, Holly, it's addictive, just as addictive as unhealthy behaviors
Your
are.
taste buds change once
Yeah.
you start eating healthier and you're consistent with it. Your taste buds will change.
Yes.
And if I eat a piece of cake now, I almost throw up. Like, I can eat a couple of bites. I like those little macaroons that I can get at the pastry shop, just because they're like bite size, and two is plenty. If I can't eat a whole piece of cake now, because it just
it's too much.
It's way too much.
You feel horrible the next day. But think about before. So tell me about like before you made your changes. Could we not eat, multiple Gigi's cupcakes?
Dessert first, girl. I would order my dessert first, eat half of it before my meal, then my meal, and then go eat the rest of my dessert. And now I barely ever even order dessert. I love berries. My favorite dessert treat that I eat every day now is a rice cake with peanut butter and raspberries. Oh my gosh. That's divine for me.
Yes, that's called dressing your carbs. So if y'all don't go follow Glucose Goddess on Instagram, I have no connection with her other than she talks about naked carbs and how that can create more insulin resistance. And so if you dress your carbs appropriately, then you can have carbohydrates.
Peanut butter is the perfect food for me. I love peanut butter. It's my favorite thing.
This has been so informative and so much fun. And honestly, I feel like we've really just started to scratch the surface. I think that we will definitely have you back, because there's so much more that we want to talk about and get a little bit deeper into. And I don't think that the effects of trauma on our health is going anywhere. And so, maybe we can spend an entire hour talking specifically about the ACE study and really digging into that. But this was fantastic. And I'm so grateful that you joined us. And I want to ask, if you were meeting Holly as you are now, and you were coming face to face with Holly 10 years ago, what is one thing that you would say to her that could encourage her?
Let's see. She was such a people pleaser back then and worried about what people thought. And she was very insecure. And I would say, girl, you are capable of so much more than you could ever think or imagine. And God's plan for you is so much bigger than what you can see right now. So just keep on keeping on, keep waiting, keep trusting. He's going to get you there. And, just don't worry about what other people think. That was probably the biggest lesson for me, is there's liberation when you get into your 40s, where you really stop caring about what other people think. And which means that you can let go of trying to keep up with the Joneses, that old saying where you try to keep up with the Joneses. And it gives you the freedom to become who you were designed to be, who you want to be, and live in your gifts and talents, and not trying to live in somebody else's shoes. It also frees me from trying to, I don't get the Botox and the fillers and I don't wear fancy clothes and name brand shoes. I sold everything and moved into a 27-foot camper. I just, because I realized I don't have to have all those things. Those things stressed me out. Those trying to keep up with everybody else stressed me out. And you know, I live a very simple life. My mom used to fuss at me because my house wouldn't clean to her standards. And she's like, but why don't you want it to be clean? And I was like, I would rather go and do things than stay at home and worry about the cleanliness of my house. Now, it was not a dangerous place for
Yeah.
anybody to live, but I swept my floor once a week instead of every day or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's just, so I downsized.
Yeah.
I don't, there's certain shows on TV. I stopped watching drama shows and reality shows with a lot of drama because once I found peace, I enjoy that peace.
Yes.
And even with movies and TV shows. And so I just don't worry about what other people think.
Yeah.
You've been designed and created for a purpose, and God's going to help you achieve that purpose and get you there. Just trust in that and believe in yourself.
Yeah. And I think one of the most dangerous things about worrying too much about what other people think is because it holds us back, because they're going to see us fail. A lot of women that I meet with, they're almost scared to start working towards health because if they don't, what are people going to say? If they don't, achieve it, it's like we put these timelines on ourselves, or you cannot, this is one thing that time has taught me, you really cannot fail as long as you're taking action. The failures I had in my life were when I did nothing. And so when you, Hollie, drop the weight of other people's opinions, your life took off. I remember we were on the phone and I was sitting in the parking lot of Whole Foods, and you were talking about some of the things that God had put on your heart, speaking at these major conferences. And I remember so specifically how excited I got inside because I knew that this was going to come into fruition, and these weren't anything but a dream in your heart at that point. And you just got back from presenting at this national conference, and I've literally watched those things that you talked about while I was sitting in my car and it was raining in the Whole Foods parking lot. I've watched these things come to life, and I think so much of that is you drop the weight of other people and their expectations on your life. You said, all right, God, I'm here. Let's do this. And you have just taken the next best step. And it's such a beautiful thing to watch. And Hollie Jeffery, this is not the last time that you will hear her name. Trust me, because she doesn't set out to be a powerful woman, but she sets out to help, to serve others, to have an impact for people who don't have a voice. And God is just using you in beautiful ways. So thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. All right. Ladies, I am going to wrap this show up today. Again, we will put some information in the show notes about Hollie and about some things that we talked about. And y'all definitely come back and listen to the next episode.
Thanks, Allison.